Hi Year 3, so today is the second lesson on Alexander the Great. So you'll know from yesterday that today what we're going to do is we're going to use the ideas and the evidence that we gathered yesterday to do a bit of writing today, and we're going to be answering this question: how great was Alexander the Great? And the history learning objective is that you can understand different interpretations of the past. We're thinking about these different views of what Alexander the Great did. And our English learning objective is I can start my sentences in different ways, and we'll think more about that in a minute. Okay, so our big question today then is how great was Alexander the Great? And we're going to be using the information that we gathered yesterday to answer this question. So remember, yesterday we should have a piece of paper with what he did that was great on one side and what he did that wasn't so great on the other side, and you should have bullet point notes of all the evidence from yesterday. So hopefully that's all fresh in your mind. So what I'd like you to do today is you'll need to have that in front of you, and then you'll need to get yourself a new piece of paper to do some writing today. We're going to be writing 2 paragraphs today using the information that we've done. And I'd just like you to start by, at the top of your sheet, actually writing out the question, how great was Alexander the Great? Because underneath that, we're then going to be answering that question by writing 2 paragraphs. So you might want to just pause the video now, get yourself a new piece of paper, and you're going to write at the top that you're going to do some writing on how great was Alexander the Great. So today we're going to be writing 2 paragraphs. One paragraph, the first paragraph, is going to be about all of the things that we found out yesterday that he did that showed that he was quite great, so all the things that were quite good that he did. And then we're going to write 1 paragraph about all the things that weren't so great. And then to finish, you're just going to have a final sentence where you decide, what do you think? Do you think he deserves the name Alexander the Great? So let's just think back to our English learning objective for a minute. That's I can start my sentences in different ways. So we can achieve this, when you write your paragraphs, it's going to be important that you try to avoid always starting with Alexander or he. If you just have lots of Alexander, or he, it can sound a bit boring. So we're going to try and avoid that by sometimes starting sentences with conjunctions that join 2 parts of a sentence together. I've put some suggestions there in red, but there are other ones that you could use as well. So when, but, although, even though, however, as soon as. So sometimes you will want to start your sentence with a conjunction, and sometimes you might want to start your sentence with an adverb, a word that describes what you're doing, a doing word, a verb, an adverb. So we've got famously, incredibly, mysteriously I've put there. Remember, adverbs often end with ly. Now you might think of some other adverbs that you could start your sentences with. That would be great. On the sentence starter sheet, which is there to help you, I've also put a couple of boxes with some conjunctions and some adverbs in, so they're there to give you some ideas as well as you're writing. Okay, so we're now going to think about the 2 paragraphs that we're going to be writing. You don't have to use these sentence starters, but you might want to pick some of them to help. You might want to start using them and then carry on your own. It's up to you. What we're going to do is we're just going to talk through how we might use these sentence starters to write our first paragraph. So as you can see here, paragraph 1 is going to be about how Alexander the Great was great. So we're going to be picking all of the things we found out yesterday that showed that he actually did live up to his name. He did deserve that title, Alexander the Great. You might want to start with a sentence a bit like this one: Alexander the Great lived up to his name in a number of different ways. Or a sentence saying Alexander the Great did deserve his name, and I'm going to explain why in this paragraph. So we then go on to say, as a child he was... And you remember from yesterday, as a child, he was really into science and reading, thanks to his famous tutor, his famous teacher called Aristotle. So we might say that as a child, he was a really enthusiastic reader and scientist. He loved learning. That's a good aspect of Alexander the Great, isn't it? And then we could go and say famously, when he was 12, hopefully you can remember what he did when he was 12. He tamed this wild horse, didn't he, called Bucephalus, who stayed with him for the rest of his life, as you remember. And this was seen to show how kind of brave and courageous Alexander the Great was. We might then go on to talk about how good a leader he was and the empire that he built. So remember, he conquered many different countries. He was a very successful leader of an army. So you might say Alexander was a very powerful, strong military leader. You might talk about how he went into the battles with his own men, talk about how he was very good at planning battles, his military strategy that we talked about yesterday. And by the age of 30, he had conquered this huge empire. And remember, we talked about yesterday, so he was in control of many different countries. He named many different cities after himself. Alexandria in Egypt was an example. And he had spread the Greek culture across these different countries. So all these Greek ideas of science and maths and like having theatres, all these amazing things the Greeks were doing, he had spread this across a lot of the world, really. And you remember as well that he even won battles when he was really outnumbered. There was that famous battle with Darius III that we learned about yesterday, when he was hugely outnumbered, but still he won. Okay, so lots of ideas there. You don't have to do it exactly as I've done it there. Totally up to you how you structure it, but there's some ideas for things that show that he was great. Once you've done that paragraph, you're going to leave a line, and then you're going to go on to your paragraph 2. So paragraph 2, as you know, is going to be about all the things that show that actually Alexander the Great wasn't so great. So you might want to start with something like however, or on the other hand, to show that you're doing the different viewpoint now. So you might say something like, however, some historians think that Alexander the Great didn't deserve the title Alexander the Great, or he wasn't so great. And we might go back to start thinking about when he became king. So you'll remember that when he became king, he was only 20, and he was quite worried about other people wanting to be king in his place. And so, can you remember what he did? That's right, he killed his rivals. So that's quite a brutal and ruthless thing to have done, isn't it? So we can explain there what he did when he became king. You might then go on to say, although he won many battles, he made his men, if you remember later on as they were winning all these battles, but he made his men do things like walking miles and miles through the desert, and many men actually died when they were doing this. And in the end, you remember when they were approaching India, his men actually said, no, we've had enough. They revolted, they refused to carry on. They were so fed up. So you think, although he was successful at winning battles, maybe he pushed his men too far. As he got older, he became more worried, you'll remember, and he was worried about even some of his friends and his advisors. And so what did he do? He actually ended up killing some of his friends and advisors, and there was that famous story that we learnt about Clytus the Black yesterday. So lots of ideas there to show that actually show the other side of the story, really, the things that show that Alexander wasn't so great. And then to finish off, you're just going to write one sentence. I think he was great, or not great, and because. So totally up to you to explain why, and make sure you include a because. So that's to finish, really, but just as a little bit of fun, I thought you might have heard of this legend of the Gordian knot puzzle, which Alexander was linked to. There was a knot tied by a king, and whoever undid the knot was prophesied to conquer Asia. And Alexander solved this problem, and you can watch the video if you'd like to find out a bit more. That's just a little bit of fun to finish off. Okay, so the sentence starters and the adverbs and conjunctions to help you are all on the separate sheet if you'd like to use those. Okay, well done everybody.